"Sell me chocolates in French, little beggar, and I'll give you my crown." King Charles II's voice thundered through Westminster Palace's grand hall, his words echoing like a whip crack against the marble walls. The noble lords and ladies erupted in cruel laughter, their voices rising and falling like waves, crashing against Emily Hart's trembling figure. "Sell me chocolates in French," the king repeated, his eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a hunter who has cornered his prey. The grand hall of Westminster Palace stretched endlessly beneath crystal chandeliers that hung like suspended stars, their light cascading down in rivers of gold over silk gowns and velvet doublets. The year was 1665, and opulence dripped from every corner. Persian rugs muffled footsteps, silver platters gleamed on mahogany tables, and the scent of expensive French perfumes mingled with roasted meats and spiced wine. The nobility moved through this space like peacocks, their laughter sharp and their eyes sharper, always searching for someone weaker to devour. At the head of the longest table sat King Charles II, restored monarch of England, his dark curls cascading over his shoulders, a burgundy doublet embroidered with golden thread stretching across his broad chest. His fingers, rings on every one, drummed against the armrest of his gilded chair. To his right sat Louis de Bourbon, French ambassador to the English court, a man whose icy blue eyes missed nothing. The ambassador's presence had transformed the evening into a competition of sophistication, and Charles was determined to prove English superiority, even if he had to crush a child to do it. "Your Majesty displays such wit." Lady Catherine Morrison cooed from her seat, her fan fluttering like a dying bird. "Indeed, the King's jest is most amusing," added Lord Thomas Beaumont, his voice oily with false admiration. "She won't last 10 seconds, whispered Duchess Margaret loudly enough for half the room to hear. "This will be the entertainment of the season." Lord Winchester chuckled, raising his goblet. Around them, courtiers leaned forward in anticipation, their faces flushed with wine and malice. They were predators sensing blood. And standing in the center of their circle, holding a wooden tray of chocolate tablets, was 12-year-old Emily Hart. The girl stood no taller than a garden fence, her simple brown dress patched at the elbows, her worn shoes barely clinging to her feet. Her father, Thomas Hart, had been a cocoa merchant who traded with Spanish ships before fever took him 6 months prior. Now Emily carried his goods, trying to honor his memory by continuing his trade. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple braid, her face pale with fear, but her green eyes, those eyes burned with something the nobles couldn't quite identify. Was it defiance? Dignity? Something they had long forgotten? Have you ever stood in a room where everyone wanted to see you fail, where every face turned toward you with the expectation of humiliation? Maybe you've experienced that moment when the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for you to crumble. Emily felt that weight now, pressing down on her shoulders like an iron mantle. The tray in her hands trembled, the chocolate tablets rattling like dice, but she didn't drop them. Her father had taught her many things in their modest home by the Thames, in that small room that smelled of cocoa beans and river water. He'd taught her how to identify quality cacao, how to negotiate with difficult merchants, and, though she'd never told anyone, he'd taught her languages. Thomas Hart had been more than a merchant. Before poverty had claimed him, he'd studied at Cambridge, had travelled through France and Spain, had dreamed of becoming a scholar. But life, cruel and indifferent, had other plans. He'd poured all his abandoned dreams into his daughter, teaching her Latin, French, and Spanish by candlelight while other children slept. "Knowledge, my darling Emily," he would whisper, "is the one treasure no one can steal from you." But what none of these nobles understood, what they couldn't possibly imagine in their world of inherited privilege, was that this child carried a weapon more powerful than any sword in the kingdom. Now, as the king's mocking words hung in the air like smoke, Emily's fingers found the small wooden medallion hidden beneath her dress collar. her father's last gift, carved with the words, Veritas vincit, truth conquers. She touched it once, twice, feeling the worn grooves her father's thumbs had made during his final days. It was warm against her skin, as if his love still lived within the wood. "Well, girl," the king leaned forward, his voice dripping with theatrical cruelty, "do you accept my generous challenge? Speak to me in the tongue of Versailles, sell me your pitiful chocolates in perfect French, and I shall place my own signet ring upon your finger." He raised his hand, showing the gleaming ruby ring that bore the royal seal. The courtiers gasped and laughed harder. "5 sovereigns says she runs crying," Lord Beaumont announced. 10 says she can't speak a single word," Lady Morrison countered, her voice sharp with glee. 20 that she faints from fear," another voice called out. The bets flew around the room like vultures circling carrion. Each wager, another nail in the coffin they were building for this child's dignity. Ambassador de Bourbon remained silent, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Something in the girl's posture had caught his attention, the way she held her head high despite the trembling, the way her jaw set with determination rather than defeat. He'd seen many things in his decades of diplomatic service, but rarely had he witnessed such quiet strength in one so young. The hall fell silent, waiting. Even the servants along the walls stopped moving, frozen like statues in the amber glow of candlelight. The fire in the great hearth crackled and popped, sending shadows dancing across the faces of the crowd. Some nobles leaned so far forward they nearly fell from their chairs. Others whispered behind jeweled hands, making wagers. The tension stretched like a bowstring pulled to breaking point. We all know that feeling, don't we? That moment when everything hangs in balance, when one choice will change everything. Let's stay with Emily and discover what happens when courage meets cruelty. But Emily didn't run. Emily didn't cry. Emily didn't faint. Instead, she lowered the tray carefully to a nearby table, her movements deliberate and precise. She smoothed her worn dress with hands that had stopped shaking. She lifted her chin, and in that moment something shifted in the room's atmosphere. Something the nobles felt but couldn't name. It was like the air before a storm, charged and waiting. "I accept your challenge, Your Majesty," Emily said clearly, her voice carrying through the vast hall despite its softness. The king's smile widened, predatory and pleased. He'd caught his rabbit. He'd have his entertainment. And tomorrow, the French ambassador would return to Versailles with stories of English wit and sophistication. Perfect. But what happened in the next moments would shatter every expectation in that gilded hall. "Begin then, child," the king commanded, settling back into his throne with the confidence of a man who'd never lost anything. "Convince Ambassador de Bourbon that these, what are they again? Chocolates from the New World?" He picked up one of the tablets, examining it with exaggerated disgust. "Convince him in his native tongue that this brown mud is worth purchasing. Go on." "We're all waiting. If this story has moved you so far, let us know in the comments what city and country you're watching from, and leave your like so we can keep sharing stories that touch hearts around the world." The nobles shifted in their seats, creating a semicircle around Emily like Romans gathering for gladiatorial games. The ambassador folded his hands on the table, his expression unreadable, a diplomat's mask perfected over decades. Emily stepped forward, and the firelight caught her face, illuminating features too mature for her age. She'd grown up too fast, had buried her father too young, had learned that the world was cruel long before she should have. But she'd also learned something else. That dignity doesn't require wealth, that knowledge weighs nothing but carries everything, and that truth, eventually, always finds its voice. For a moment, just a heartbeat, Emily closed her eyes, and suddenly she wasn't in Westminster Palace anymore. She was 7 years old, sitting cross-legged on the wooden floor of their small room. Her father knelt before her, a French grammar book open between them. The single candle cast dancing shadows on the walls. Don't worry about perfection, Emily. Worry about truth. When you speak with truth in your heart, every language becomes beautiful. And on that day, remember, you carry my love, your mother's courage and the knowledge that makes you free. Let those who mock you discover what poverty taught us, that true wealth lives in here. He tapped her chest, right over her heart. The grand hall crystallized back into focus, the sneering faces, the golden lights, the trap set for her humiliation. But something had changed inside her. Her father's voice still resonated in her chest, warm and steady. She touched the medallion one more time. "This is for you, Papa," she whispered so softly only she could hear. What none of them could see, what the girl herself barely understood, was that she'd been preparing for this moment her entire life. Then she began to speak, and her voice transformed the very air in the room. "Votre Majesté," Emily began, and the words flowed like honey, like music, like a river that had been dammed for too long, finally breaking free. "Ces douceurs viennent des Indes occidentales, où le soleil caresse la terre avec une chaleur que nous, en Angleterre, ne pouvons qu'imaginer." The effect was immediate and electric. "Wait," someone breathed. "Did she just—" Another voice trailed off in disbelief. Ambassador de Bourbon's eyes widened like a man witnessing a miracle. Lady Morrison's fan clattered to the floor, the sound sharp in the sudden stillness. Lord Beaumont's mouth fell open like a landed fish. The king's smug smile froze on his face, transforming slowly into something between shock and horror. "Mon Dieu," the ambassador whispered. Emily continued, her French flawless, her accent impeccable, not the rough approximation of an English learner, but the pure crystalline pronunciation of Parisian nobility. "Le cacao est cultivé par des mains expertes, récolté avec soin, et transformé en ces tablettes par un procédé que les Espagnols ont perfectionné depuis des décennies." That's impossible," Lord Winchester stammered. "Where did a beggar child learn?" Duchess Margaret couldn't finish her sentence. "Have you ever witnessed the moment when someone who's been underestimated reveals their true power? When the hunter becomes the hunted? Stay with us. What happens next will take your breath away." She picked up one of the chocolate tablets, holding it up to the candlelight where it gleamed dark and rich. "Chaque morceau contient l'essence d'un voyage, des plantations lointaines aux ports animés, des marchés exotiques jusqu'à votre table royale." The French flowed from her lips like she'd been born in Versailles itself, each syllable perfect, each phrase elegant and refined. She described the chocolate with the passion of a true merchant's daughter, with the education of a scholar, with the dignity of someone who knew her worth regardless of what others believed. "Cette douceur n'est pas seulement un aliment, Votre Majesté. C'est une expérience, c'est la chaleur des tropiques dans chaque bouchée, c'est le travail de centaines de mains, c'est un pont entre les mondes." "She speaks like a countess," someone whispered in awe. "Better than a countess," another replied. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "When you speak with truth in your heart, every language becomes beautiful." Ambassador de Bourbon rose from his seat, his chair scraping against the floor in the profound silence. He moved toward Emily like a man approaching an apparition, his diplomatic mask cracking to reveal genuine astonishment. "Mon Dieu," he breathed, louder now. "C'est du français parisien parfait. Mademoiselle, where did you learn to speak like this?" The room held its breath. Every eye fixed on the small girl who'd just performed the impossible. Emily met the ambassador's eyes, and for the first time that evening, she smiled. A small, sad smile that carried the weight of loss and the strength of love. "Mon père était un homme cultivé, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur. He believed that education was the only inheritance he could give me, that no one could steal. So he taught me. Every evening after his work, by candlelight, he taught me." Her voice carried clearly through the silent hall. He told me that poverty might take our home, sickness might take our health, death might take our time together. But knowledge, once learned, could never be stolen. It was the one treasure that would always be mine. Perhaps you know someone like Emily's father, someone who gave everything to lift up the next generation, someone who believed in education as liberation. If you do, this story is for them too. She speaks better French than half the courtiers at Versailles, the ambassador declared, turning to face King Charles with something dangerous flickering in his gaze. The diplomat's voice carried a sharp edge now, the velvet glove removed to reveal steel, better than most of my own delegation, in fact. This child has a gift that would be celebrated in France, treasured, cultivated. He paused, letting his words sink in. Tell me, Your Majesty, how many of your nobles can claim such linguistic mastery? The silence that followed was deafening. The king's face had gone pale, then red, then pale again, a man cycling through shame, anger, and the dawning realization of catastrophic error. The nobles who had laughed so cruelly moments before now studied their plates with sudden fascination, as if the silver patterns had become impossibly interesting. Lady Morrison retrieved her fan with trembling hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Lord Beaumont cleared his throat repeatedly, as if choking on his own shame. Those who'd made bets suddenly found urgent reasons to study their wine goblets. "This is," Lord Winchester started, but couldn't finish. "Extraordinary," Duchess Margaret completed, her voice small and ashamed. The silence in the hall had transformed from anticipatory to suffocating, from entertainment to judgment. The same people who'd circled like vultures now felt the weight of their own cruelty crushing down on them. We've all seen it, haven't we? The moment when mockery turns to silence, when bullies realize they've picked the wrong target. But what happens next? That's where this story truly begins to soar. Keep watching. But the king, Charles II of England, restored monarch, defender of the realm, the king found himself trapped by his own words. He'd made a public challenge. He'd promised his crown, his ring, before witnesses, before a foreign ambassador representing the most powerful court in Europe. And now this child, this beggar girl he'd meant to humiliate for sport, had met his impossible challenge and exceeded it. "It was merely a jest," Charles stammered, and for the first time in his reign, he sounded uncertain. The commanding voice that issued decrees and judgments cracked like thin ice over a frozen pond. Surely no one believed. Ambassador de Bourbon's voice cut through the king's excuses like a blade through silk. He drew himself to his full height, and suddenly the room remembered that he wasn't just a diplomat. He was the representative of France, of Louis XIV, the Sun King himself. His word carried the weight of armies, treaties, trade routes, and alliances. "Your Majesty," the ambassador continued, his tone now formal and cold, "in France, a king's word before witnesses is sacred law. To break such a vow, even spoken in jest, is to make a mockery of honor itself. It suggests that English promises are worth less than the air that carries them." The political implications crashed through the room like thunder. Every noble understood instantly. If word reached Versailles that England's king broke his promises for sport, that he toyed with honor as children toy with marbles, the consequences would be devastating. Trade agreements questioned, alliances reconsidered. England's already fragile position among European powers could crumble further. The ambassador's words hung in the air like a sentence of execution. "Your Majesty gave your word," the ambassador pressed, his French accent thickening with emotion. "Before witnesses, before a representative of France, you promised this child your ring if she met your challenge. She has met it. She has exceeded it. Now the question before this assembly is simple. Is an English king's word worth anything at all?" "He must keep it," someone whispered. "The king gave his word," another voice agreed, louder now. "A promise is a promise. a third voice called out, and suddenly the courtiers who'd been eager for Emily's humiliation found themselves trapped by their own sense of honor, however dormant it had been moments before. Have you ever watched the powerful become powerless, when the armor of authority cracks and the human beneath is exposed, vulnerable and small? Have you ever seen someone who seemed invincible suddenly revealed as just another person who made a terrible mistake? The courtiers saw it now, their king, their sovereign, cornered by his own arrogance and a child's courage. King Charles II felt the walls of his own palace closing in. He'd been so confident, so certain of his superiority, so eager to impress the French delegation with English wit and sophistication. Instead, he'd revealed himself as a bully, a breaker of oaths, a man whose word meant less than a child's dignity. His hands moved to his ring, the heavy signet bearing England's royal seal. The ring that had touched documents of state, that had symbolized his power for years, that represented everything he'd fought to reclaim after his exile. His fingers trembled as they twisted the gold band. The ruby caught the firelight, seeming to burn like a coal against his skin. The medallion around Emily's neck seemed to grow heavier, warmer. Veritas vincit. Truth conquers. Her father had been right all along. But before the king could remove the ring, before he could complete this moment of his own destruction, Emily spoke again. "Your Majesty," she said softly, and there was no triumph in her voice, no gloating, no revenge in her tone, only a profound sadness that made her seem ancient despite her 12 years. "I don't want your ring. I don't want your crown." The room collectively exhaled a breath it hadn't realized it was holding. "What?" Lady Morrison gasped. "She's refusing it." Lord Beaumont sputtered in disbelief. The king looked up, confusion and relief warring on his face like armies battling for control of his expression, but Emily wasn't finished. "My father taught me that when someone keeps their word, heaven smiles," she continued, her small hand reaching again for the wooden medallion under her collar, pressing it against her heart. "He taught me that honor isn't something you wear on your finger. It's something you carry inside, in every choice you make, in every word you speak. You offered me your ring, and I proved I earned it by your challenge's rules. But what I truly need isn't gold or jewels or symbols of power." She picked up the tray of chocolates again, holding it with both hands, as if it were an offering in a sacred ritual. Her voice remained steady, clear, reaching every corner of that vast hall. "What I need is for people to remember that my father, Thomas Hart, cocoa merchant, scholar, dreamer, was a good man, that his daughter carries his legacy with pride, that poverty doesn't mean ignorance, and humble birth doesn't mean humble worth, that a man who works with his hands can have a mind that rivals any scholar and a heart bigger than any nobleman's estate. Tell us in the comments, have you ever met someone who taught you that true wealth isn't in your pocket, but in your mind and heart? Someone who showed you that dignity can't be bought or sold? We're building a community here of people who understand that respect is earned through character, not titles. Join us. Tears streamed down several faces in the crowd now, not tears of laughter, but of recognition. How many of them had forgotten where they came from? How many had built their pride on the broken backs of others? How many had laughed at suffering because it made them feel powerful? How many had lost their own fathers, mothers, loved ones who taught them better than this? "She's right," someone whispered. "God forgive us," another voice choked out. "What have we become?" a third person asked, the question hanging in the air like an accusation. Ambassador de Bourbon moved toward the king, his expression softer now, but still firm. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, for the king's ears primarily, but loud enough for those nearby to hear, "I have seen much in my years of service to France. I've witnessed coronations and executions, treaties signed and wars declared, fortunes won and lost. But I have rarely, perhaps never, seen dignity displayed so purely as this child has shown tonight." He gestured toward Emily, who stood with her father's medallion visible now outside her dress, the words Veritas Vincit catching the light. Perhaps, the ambassador continued, this is an opportunity not for humiliation, but for transformation, not for losing face, but for finding soul. The word hung in the air like a key turning in a lock. Transformation. Hadn't he too once depended on the kindness of strangers who saw past his circumstances to his humanity? When had he forgotten? When had he become the type of man who would mock a child for entertainment? When had power corrupted him so thoroughly that he'd lost sight of the values he'd once held dear? Knowledge is the one treasure no one can steal from you. Emily's father's words seemed to echo in the king's mind, though he'd never heard them before. Perhaps some truths are so universal they need no voice to be understood. The king slowly rose from his throne, his movements careful and deliberate. The entire hall held its breath as he descended the steps, 1, 2, 3, until he stood before Emily on level ground. King and commoner, face to face, neither above the other. For a long moment he simply looked at her, this child who just taught him what his tutors, advisors, and years of royal privilege had failed to convey. "Emily Hart," he said, and his voice carried a gravity it had lacked before, a weight of genuine feeling rather than performance. "Your father taught you well. Better perhaps than my own tutors taught me, better than this court has taught me, better than power has taught me." He paused, swallowing what might have been pride or shame or both. "I give you my word, my true word, not given in jest, not given for entertainment, but given with the full weight of my crown and conscience, that your father's name will be recorded in the palace archives. Thomas Hart, scholar and merchant, father of Emily Hart, who taught his daughter that dignity outweighs crowns, and that knowledge is the inheritance no thief can steal." "Your Majesty is generous," Emily said softly. But the king wasn't finished. He reached into his doublet and withdrew a small purse of coins, more than the chocolates were worth, more than Emily had seen in months. "For your goods," he said, "and for the education you've given us all tonight." But Emily, in a gesture that would be remembered and retold for generations, pushed the purse back gently toward the king. "I'll accept payment for the chocolates, Your Majesty. Fair trade for fair goods, but not a penny more. My father taught me that charity wounds dignity, while honest work honors it. I'm a merchant's daughter. I trade honestly or not at all." The king stared at her, and in his eyes was something like wonder. "You refuse royal generosity?" "I accept royal fairness," Emily corrected gently. "Pay me what the chocolates are worth. No more, no less. That's all my father would have wanted. That's all I want." If you're feeling the power of this moment, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We need more stories like this, stories that remind us what real honor looks like. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful moments. Let's grow this community together. Ambassador de Bourbon laughed then, a genuine warm laugh that broke the tension like spring sun melting winter ice. "Extraordinary," he declared, and there was pure delight in his voice now. "Mademoiselle Hart, I extend to you an invitation here and now, before all these witnesses. Come to France, study at the Sorbonne. Your gift for languages should be cultivated, not buried beneath poverty. You have a mind that would shine in any court, any academy in Europe." He turned to address the room, his voice carrying to every corner. "I will personally sponsor your education. You'll study under the finest tutors in Paris, learn languages, philosophy, diplomacy, literature, everything that mind of yours deserves to learn. And when your studies are complete, you'll have opportunities that most people only dream of." The offer hung in the air like a golden thread, a path from darkness into light, from poverty to possibility, from loss to legacy. Emily's eyes widened, tears finally breaking through her careful composure. "Truly, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, you would do this for the daughter of a cocoa merchant?" "I would do this for the daughter of a remarkable man," the ambassador corrected firmly. I would do this for a child who has more nobility in her little finger than most titled nobles have in their entire bloodlines. I would do this because France recognizes genius when she sees it, and you, mademoiselle, are brilliant. But first, the king interjected, and now there was something new in his voice, determination, perhaps even hope for redemption. First, Mademoiselle Hart, you must help me. You must teach me proper French. God knows this realm could benefit from better linguistic education, and I— He paused, humility not coming easily to royal lips. I clearly need a better teacher than my pride has allowed me to seek. The king looked around at his court, at the nobles who'd laughed at cruelty and wagered on humiliation. And perhaps, he added, his voice strengthening, perhaps there are others here who could benefit from learning that wisdom and worth aren't determined by birth or wealth. Perhaps we all need to remember what we've forgotten. He turned back to Emily, and in a gesture that shocked everyone present, King Charles II bowed, not deeply, but unmistakably, to a 12-year-old merchant's daughter. Will you teach an old fool, Mademoiselle Hart? Will you help me become the kind of king who deserves his crown rather than the kind who merely wears it? Emily clutched her father's medallion, feeling its warmth, its weight, its truth. Tears rolled down her cheeks now, and she made no effort to hide them. Papa would have liked you, Your Majesty, the man you're choosing to become. He believed everyone deserved a second chance to choose honor. Then I accept that second chance, the king said, and I propose something more. He raised his voice to address the full assembly. Effective immediately, I establish a scholarship in the name of Thomas Hart, the Scholarship of Honor. It will provide education to children of merchants and tradespeople who show academic promise, regardless of their ability to pay. Because, as I've learned tonight, true nobility has nothing to do with titles. Hear, hear, Ambassador de Bourbon called out. Bless the king, someone else shouted, and then slowly at first, then building like a wave, the courtiers began to applaud. Not mockingly this time, but genuinely. Some stood, then more, until the entire hall was on its feet, clapping for a child who'd taught them all a lesson they'd never forget. Lady Morrison was crying openly now. Lord Beaumont had his head bowed in what might have been prayer or shame, or both. Duchess Margaret mouthed the words, "Forgive me," though Emily was too far away to hear. The hunter had become the hunted. The powerful had been made powerless. The rich had been shown their poverty, and the child they'd meant to destroy had saved them all from their own cruelty. What happened next wasn't grand or theatrical. It was quiet, profound, the kind of transformation that happens in hearts rather than halls. The king purchased every chocolate tablet Emily carried, paying a fair price that would keep her fed for months. Ambassador de Bourbon arranged for her passage to France and enrollment at schools that would nurture her gifts. And most importantly, King Charles II did something unprecedented. He created a permanent fund for the Scholarship of Honor, dedicating royal revenues to ensure it would continue long after his death. The Scholarship of Honor, he proclaimed in a formal decree written that very night, because, as he announced to his court, honor is keeping your word, even when it costs you pride. Honor is lifting others up rather than pushing them down. Honor is recognizing worth in unexpected places and having the courage to admit when you've been wrong. Emily Hart did go to France. She studied linguistics, philosophy, and diplomacy at institutions that would have been forever closed to her without that night's events. She mastered 6 languages fluently and became one of the most respected translators and diplomats in Europe. She negotiated treaties, interpreted at royal courts, taught at universities, and wrote books on language and learning that are still studied today. But she never forgot her father's lessons. She never lost the wooden medallion which she wore every day of her life. She never abandoned her belief that education should belong to everyone, regardless of birth or wealth. And she never stopped being simply Emily Hart, daughter of Thomas, merchant and scholar, who taught his child that knowledge is the treasure no one can take away. And true to his word, King Charles became her student. Once a month, Emily would send him letters from France, written in perfect Parisian French, filled with corrections of his grammar, suggestions for his pronunciation, and stories of her studies. The king kept every letter, bound them in leather, and stored them in his private library. He studied them diligently, practicing pronunciation in private where no one could mock his mistakes. In his final years, Charles would often take out those letters and read them, remembering the night a child taught him what it meant to be truly royal. He would touch the pages and think of Thomas Hart, who'd given his daughter the tools to survive in a cruel world, and he would feel grateful for the humiliation that had saved his soul. The nobles of Westminster began, slowly, to change. Not all at once. Change never happens that way, does it? But like dawn spreading across a landscape, person by person, heart by heart, they began to remember what they'd forgotten. That every human carries dignity, regardless of birth or wealth. That cruelty isn't strength but weakness. That true nobility has nothing to do with titles and everything to do with character. Lady Morrison became a patron of schools for poor children. Lord Beaumont endowed a library open to all classes. Duchess Margaret established a fund for orphans. They couldn't undo their past cruelty, but they could choose differently going forward. And that, perhaps, is all any of us can do. Years later, when Emily returned to England as a renowned scholar and linguist, she visited Westminster Palace once more. The king, older now and wiser, his dark curls turned to grey, greeted her not as a subject, but as a friend. Perhaps even as the teacher she'd become. They walked together through the grand hall where it had all happened, and Charles showed her the glass cases he'd installed. Inside were the chocolate tablets she'd sold that night, preserved as historical artifacts. Beside them, a plaque told the story of Emily Hart and her father Thomas, a story of love stronger than death, of education as liberation, of a child who taught a king what nobility truly means. "I lost no crown that night," the king told her quietly, away from the ears of courtiers, standing before those preserved chocolates. "I gained my soul. You taught me that a king's true worth lies not in his power to humiliate, but in his power to keep his word, to admit error, to choose transformation over pride." Emily smiled, that same small, sad, profound smile she'd worn as a child. "My father would have liked you, Your Majesty, the man you became that night and every day after. He always said that the measure of a person isn't in their mistakes, but in how they respond when those mistakes are revealed." "I think often about what would have happened if you'd run," Charles admitted. "If you'd cried, if you'd crumbled as I expected. I would have laughed, felt powerful, and remained the fool I was. You saved me from myself, Emily, you and your father's wisdom." "Papa saved me first," Emily replied, touching the medallion she still wore. "He gave me the tools to save myself. I just used them when the moment came." Perhaps you've felt it too, that moment when someone unexpected changes everything. When the person dismissed, overlooked, underestimated, reveals strength that shames those who thought themselves strong. When truth speaks in a small voice but echoes through history. This is the power of dignity, friends. The power of keeping your word. The power of remembering that every person you meet carries infinite worth, infinite potential, infinite right to respect. Tell us in the comments, have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment where dignity triumphed over cruelty? Where someone underestimated proved themselves in ways that changed minds and opened hearts? Have you known someone like Emily's father, who invested everything in the next generation's education, or someone like Emily herself, who stood strong when the whole world wanted them to break? Your stories matter. Your voice matters. You are part of this community that believes in honor, in justice, in the transformative power of keeping our word. We're all here together, learning from stories like Emily's, reminding each other that character matters more than status, that truth always finds its voice, that dignity is a choice we make every day. Every year, on the anniversary of that winter night in 1665, the Scholarship of Honor accepts new students. Young people from humble origins, children of merchants and laborers, daughters and sons of families who work with their hands and dream with their hearts. They walk through Westminster's gates not as beggars, but as scholars, not as inferiors, but as equals, carrying forward the legacy that began when one girl refused to be humiliated and one king learned to keep his word. The scholarship still exists today, friends. Centuries later, it still provides education to those who need it most. Thomas Hart's legacy lives on. Emily Hart's courage echoes across time, and the lesson of that night continues wherever people choose honor over cruelty, truth over performance, and courage over fear. Because at the end of the day, what endures isn't the laughter of crowds or the glitter of crowns. What endures is the courage to stand for dignity, the wisdom to recognize worth in unexpected places, and the love between parent and child that transcends even death. Thomas Hart lived on in his daughter. Emily Hart lived on in countless students. The king lived on in the transformation he chose, and the lesson of that night lives on in everyone who hears this story and chooses to be better. Thank you for accompanying us to the end of this journey. Tell us in the comments which part moved you most. Was it Emily's courage, her father's love, the king's transformation, or perhaps the ambassador's intervention? Subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming stories. Leave your like if you believe in the invisible strength of dignity and family. And before you go, check out the story I've linked for you. I'm certain it will also move you and make you reflect. We are a community of people who believe that every person deserves respect, that words have power, that parents' love echoes across generations, and that sometimes the smallest among us teach the greatest lessons. Thank you for being part of this journey. Thank you for believing that stories can change hearts. Thank you for understanding that dignity isn't given. It's claimed, it's defended, it's lived every single day. Until the next story, remember, your worth isn't determined by others' opinions, but by the truth you carry in your heart. And knowledge, once learned, is the treasure no one can ever steal from you. Keep that with you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And we'll see you in the next story.